Welcome to A Voice and Beyond. We have Brian Gill. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I am so excited about having you on the show. You are one of my favorite humans, and I have to tell you why.
Oh, please. Thank you. That what an honor.
Okay.
Thank you for that lovely compliment.
Well, because you have such a great sense of humor. You're almost an Aussie. We met, it was either 2017 or 2018 in Australia, and you laughed at all my jokes.
I know. What a compliment, first of all, to be almost an Aussie. I love that. Yeah, but no, I love the sense of humor. Your sense of humor, and I think we're kindred spirits there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Brian, I have so many things that I want to talk to you about, and I've been looking forward to this. There's things in our conversations today that I've not spoken to other people about because they're big topics, but I feel with you because we kind of had this lovely friendship. I feel like I'm in a safe space asking you these questions. So I'd like to start off with introducing you. You're a world-renowned educator, a singer, voice researcher, and founder of Gill Mindful Voice Training. You have a DMA and a certificate in vocology, and in 2011, you were the Van L. Lawrence Fellowship winner. Congratulations, that's a big win.
Thank you.
And at present, you are a professor of voice and voice pedagogy at the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. Wow. Now, I know aside from that amazing sense of humor and that big heart that you are an absolute geek.
Some have said this before, yes.
You are a geek. And I've done a little stalk on you, and I see that you had a big performance career, which was really surprising. You sang across genres, including opera, classical, hard rock,
Yes.
heavy metal,
Yeah.
funk, country, classical, like musical theatre, Indian classical, and jazz. You performed as a bass player and a singer for approximately 35 years. So you had a huge performance career, and you featured in some huge bands. One of them was Doobie Brothers, wasn't it?
The Moody
The
Brothers.
Moody Brothers, sorry, oh, Doobie Brothers, Moody Brothers. Well, we
Yes,
got brothers right.
that's right. Got the brothers in there.
Yeah. What was your first gig? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think the first gig I ever did was I think I was 15, 14 or 15, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a oh my gosh, it was in a band called Sanctuary, which was like a heavy metal kind of like Black Sabbath almost tribute band.
Wow, I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and we started at it was an outside concert in this park.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was the first thing. And I was addicted from the start. I was like, I know I need to do this in my life. So yeah.
Well, okay, so you started off in that band, and then did you go and have voice training from there, or had you already been having vocal lessons?
It started there. I did everything kind of came out of just having listened a lot and mimicking people. And I think that worked well for me. And I made some good choices, especially within heavy metal. A lot of the vocal icons that I followed were like Rob Halford, Bruce Dickinson and Jeff Tate. And so just listening to the way they screamed, I would mimic it. And it ended up being quite sustainable and felt easy. And it wasn't until college that I pursued like voice study.
Hmm.
So, several years after starting.
Yeah, that sounds like me because I actually had that career as well from the age of 15. And I learnt by mimicking, and I was listening to people like Tina Turner, Shirley Bassey, all those big belty voices. And I was able to make those sounds really easily and sustainably by just figuring it out intuitively. Only difference is I never had classical training, but you went on to have classical training, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I went in. Well, it was an odd thing because I went in, we wanted to keep our band together. At that time, it was Powerhouse. And it was with my two brothers. And we decided that we would, to appease my parents, we would go to an undergrad degree at a local university and just, see how things went. And we would keep, doing any kind of gigging we could with the band. And when I went in there, I thought, well, I'm going to major in music, clearly.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, it'd be easiest to major in bass, so I don't have to worry about singing, because I was singing heavy metal and hard rock, so that doesn't fit into the curriculum at school, which is opera. And so I thought I'll just do bass. But then they told me I had to play in the orchestra, and
Oh.
I was a heavy metal and funk at the time as well, bass player, and that's the electric bass. I had no idea how to play with a bow. And
Mm.
so I asked them, I said, hey, I've been playing for years now and I don't want to look bad. So is there anything I could do instead of being an orchestra in order to get my chops up first? I wanted to be able to play with the bow before I went into orchestra. And they said, sure, we'll let you do choir for a semester.
No.
Yes. So I was like, all right. So I got in choir and I ended up sitting next to a voice major, this guy named Donnie. And I remember after we got done with the first rehearsal, he looked at me and said, dude, you're loud.
I have to share something with you right there. I was never allowed in choir because I was too loud.
Too loud. I think that's probably what he was insinuating. But he went on to say, hey, we're looking for people for opera workshop. And he said, you should come by and see my voice teacher. So he introduced me to his voice teacher, and I sang for her. And she said, I'll get you a scholarship. I'll get you a scholarship, and that'll be it. And so I thought, really? So as we're just kind of staying in just to keep the band together, it'll be free. My parents will be thrilled. And she did. She got me a scholarship, and I agreed to study classical singing.
How
Uh,
was that experience for you, transitioning from those heavy metal sounds to classical? Was that
Totally
hard?
bizarre. It was totally bizarre, very foreign. And in retrospect, I realize it in some respects, not to speak ill of anyone, but I think in some respects that it had a lot of maybe a little pushing and a little over expanding, kind of, a little more swallowed than I think ultimately one should be. But it got me started. So I'm very thankful because it got me started, and it fostered my love for opera,
Mhm.
and facilitated a lot of things. But hindsight's 2020. So
Yes,
there was a little bit of a conflict because the heavy metal and the other stuff came very naturally to me and felt like an extension of my speaking voice,
yes,
whereas this ended up not feeling that way.
yes.
I still enjoyed it, and it still came pretty easily to me. So I won some Nats competitions and Charlotte Music Club. It was back in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so it was good,
Mhm.
um, but definitely strange.
Yes, yeah. Wow. I I actually had classical training for the first time last year
Hmm.
as an part of someone's research, their doctoral research, as a CCM singer who's had a long-standing career, never had any classical training, and what impact that would have on my voice in
Yeah.
terms of range, sustainability, um, resonance. So I was hooked up and we did all this pre and testing afterwards. And it was such a bizarre experience. I was really grateful for the experience. But
Hmm.
as you said, it was bizarre because half the lesson was spent trying to get my larynx down into that. And so it was like getting that, lowering the larynx, and then all this breath work. Like
Yeah.
the amount of breath I was almost passing out from the amount of breath. And then they interviewed me after the I had done my series of lessons and there had been some improvement. However, my argument was because I hadn't had voice training for a long time, how could they prove that it was the classical training that made the difference? And if I had have gone to a CCM teacher, would I maybe not have had the same benefits as
Right.
that? So anyway, that's an aside, but I know it is bizarre as a CCM person, heavily entrenched in that music, to have classical training. It's like a different beast.
Yeah, it's a different beast. And I also think that there is such a high degree of variability within classical training. You know, so I know now, like the things that I initially learned, and even through dozens of other teachers, I don't teach anything like they teach. I mean, you know what I
Yes.
mean? I've realized that I think that there's certain things that have taken root within classical that are disadvantageous and
Mm.
not really truly following the si canto como si parla, like one sings as one speaks, right? It doesn't really follow that, and so you hear the threads within opera kind of heading down this, I would say, less immediate path, less sustainable path in a lot of ways. Yeah, so I think that's worth pointing out, that classical training, it could mean a lot of things, like the
Absolutely.
things we experienced. Yeah,
Absolutely. And it depends on the teacher and the training that they've had, because
exactly.
clearly that master apprentice model seems to still be rearing its head within the classical traditions. What was the biggest obstacle, though, you as someone who had been performing those styles and then having the classical training, what was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome? Or what was the biggest difficulty for you as a singer?
Yeah. Well, one was the schedule.
Oh,
Opera ends at 11, so I kind of took off pretty quickly and got some nice secondary roles at Opera Carolina early on in my late teens and early 20s. And so that would finish at 11 o'clock, and then I would go do a gig, go do a hard rock, funk rock, or heavy metal gig until 3 a.m. somewhere else, and then have to get up then and, and do the schooling thing, and then also go to a lesson after having had 4 hours sleep or whatever. So
yes.
that was, in the beginning, that was really hard. Just the schedule alone, they kind of clashed. One was a
Mm,
very late night thing, and the other was not.
mm-hmm.
And then I think the other switching back and forth, because I believe that one, like when I finally found my mentor that I still claim as my main mentor, Barbara Dosher, when I once she got deeply involved in detail with me, I finally said to myself, oh, it's just like my speaking voice. I distinctly remember that transition. I thought that's what she guided me down, and it sounded classical. It sounded very distinctly classical, but it was much more closely related to the other things I did. Genre-wise, clearly there were different things happening,
Mm-hmm.
but sensation-wise, it was much closer to my speaking voice. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, was getting past the things that weren't truly helpful
Mm.
in
But
class.
as a female, that wouldn't work because you're in a different
Correct.
register, because
Yeah.
we're in our, like, I'm not a terminology snob, so I'm just going to say head voice and chest voice for the sake of most people. I think they still use that terminology, but as CCM singers, we're primarily in our chest voice,
Right.
and to then have to go into that head voice and
Mm-hmm.
stay in that sound, no matter
Yes.
how low you go, that was really hard for me.
Right. Yeah, right. To bring that lower. I mean, I still think you carry the idea that if you're in head voice and you're still close to speech, you're doing the right thing. Whereas
Uh-huh.
if you go into head voice and then you go, oh, that's very far from speech. That, I would say that carryover is possible to say. It's
Interesting.
very different than speech, because it is head voice. But there's an immediacy and a pronunciation of vowels that can happen even with the thinner edge of the vocal folds, less contact. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so interesting. Then how did you come to teaching? Was it something that you planned to do, or was it something that happened serendipitously?
It's something, yeah, I didn't think about it too much, but as I was gigging out, the first requests I had were for bass. A lot of people, especially of that age, around 15, 14, 15, 16, 17, they were all into an instrument, either drums or guitar or bass. And so I had a lot of requests for teaching bass because I'd be playing out and they would say, I want to learn what you do. And I started teaching and I loved it.
Mhm.
Absolutely loved it. I was so passionate about it. And I kept thinking, man, as my students were getting better, and then ultimately I'd start to see my students out on stage, that was the biggest thrill of my life. I mean, to me, almost a bit more than me being out on stage. It was like
Totally get it.
I taught them how to do that. And so then that carried very naturally into voice teaching. After I was studying classical for a year, people started asking me for voice lessons within that realm.
Mm.
So,
It's really unusual in our community for us to come from that performance background first and then go into teaching and academia. Usually people go into academia and study and then go off and do what they need to do.
yeah.
But I feel that it's a real advantage having had that experience of being at that roots level of being on the stage and having that performance career. Do you feel that that was an advantage to you? And if so, how does that still impact on your teaching now?
Yeah, I think it was a huge advantage because you know what you're dealing with. You know the nerve factor, you know the reliability factor, the kind of worries that people encounter. Will this happen? Or what are the distractions with sound system, particularly I mean, actually sound, period. Because with
Mhm.
an opera, it's like, how do I hear myself? And what kind of monitor system do they have for the orchestra? Or how much can you hear the orchestra? Right. And it's such an interesting thing to get used to. And then within contemporary, what is it like working with microphones? And what if
Mm.
you're the opening band and the people who are running this, the sound system, they don't really know your band as well. And so you might not get the things that you want or as clear a monitor mix. And how does that affect your voice? So I think knowing the ins and outs of it's really helpful because then you know what you need to dive into with your students and you can kind of warn them ahead of time, as you're going through this voice balancing. You can also inform them on the performance aspect of it.
Yes, because the performance too, it's knowing what audiences are going to want to listen to
Right.
and what makes a good performer. It's not just making a good singer, but I know with my students, it's about, well, people will want to come and hear you
Mhm.
because you have these qualities. It's not just being a good singer. You've got to be able to perform and you've got to have that authenticity and that honesty on stage, and it's creating that whole package. And if you haven't been on a stage yourself, it's really hard to explain that or know what those things are.
Yeah.
But most importantly, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, right. And how do you fill space? How do you entertain,
Mm-hmm.
even in between the songs that you're doing? Like, how do you hold an audience that way? And I feel like that also carries over into giving master classes. I was just over in Sweden and we did a course, Johan Sundberg, Philippe Land, and others, and myself, and as we did it, I did several master classes. And one of the things that was funny, somebody came up to me and they said, not only did you do a 2-hour master class, but you entertained us.
Yes.
And I thought, right, it's
Yes.
how do you draw people into it? It's as a performer or also as a performer in a master class, quote unquote. You need to find ways to engage an audience. And so, yeah, that comes from
So,
performance.
so true. Because anything where I've got to stand up in front of people, I think of it as a performance, whether it's a master class, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a presentation. For
Yep.
me, it is a performance.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
And you can't get the performer out of you. I was a performer for nearly 40 years. So it's hard for me not to perform.
That's right.
You
It's
know,
automatic, just turns on.
it
I'm in
just
front of
turns
people.
on. Yeah, where you want to be funny and you want to make it entertaining for someone so they're not sitting there going, oh, okay, well, that's good.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. But for you, having performed across all those styles,
Mhm.
then, and having sung on stage and having such an in-depth knowledge of those styles, how does that impact your teaching? So not just the performer and the gig and the venue, but actually having made those sounds yourself. Do you think that's a big advantage to you as a teacher?
Yeah, huge advantage. So then when you're working, you understand the genre, you understand the language of the genre. So not only are you going for a coordination, but the person also trusts that you're heading towards the aesthetic that they're supposed to deliver. And they know that you know it because you've done it. And so I think that that's really important. And I think in order to be responsible, I guess would be the word that I'd
Mm,
use, you know, that you should have, I think someone should have engaged with a style that they're going to teach. Now, I will say that I have been asked, since I do have a broad range of styles that I've engaged in, I have been asked by people, would you teach me? And this is what I sing. And I'll tell them right up front, I've never sung that. So I can tell you that I'm not an expert in that area. I do understand voice though. So if you want to play around and we figure out how certain aspects of voice as an instrument figure into the style you're doing, I'm willing to do that. But I just want to let you know that I don't bring an expertise in A, B, or C, like Indian classical singing. I learned from students of mine, one very in particular, in the details of that, what they're drawing upon, the tuning differences, the inflections, what's expected, right? And so that's just keeping an open mind. But I said up front, this is not my expertise. I can help you balance your voice, I can help you do all those things, but it will require more conversation in order to see how it integrates into the style.
is there a style you won't teach?
Um, not without the caveat that I just said. I'll
Okay.
teach anything as long as they understand that I'm going to come at it from we need to commune. We need to
Mm,
commune. I'm going to be dependent on you. So their styles I'd be hesitant to teach because it's not my expertise.
mm.
Reggae. I've played reggae bass a lot, but I've not sung a tremendous amount in that style. Things like that. But
Yes,
if a reggae singer came to me and said, "Hey, my voice is in trouble. Can you help me out?" I'll say, "Absolutely." I said, "But
yes.
you understand the genre, so I'll be dependent on your input for whether you feel like it's authentic or not."
Yes, I totally get that. I won't, I, I'm like that. I would never teach a classical singer because I'm definitely not an expert in classical training other than those few lessons that I had. It is not my jam. I don't understand how to make those sounds authentically. I mean, I can mimic those sounds, but whether they sound authentic or not is another thing. And the other thing I won't teach is jazz. I mean, I'll work with the voice, but I won't work with the style because coming from a pop and rock background, I sing
Mhm.
on one, you know,
Yeah,
don't move me from one.
right.
So therefore, as teachers, I know there's a lot of teachers out there who say the opposite. They are classically trained teachers who teach CCM, and a lot of them actually don't like the music. I've
Mhm.
heard that. I've heard that from these people, and I'm not calling them out. I'm just saying.
We
So,
we
what about then?
do it. Can we do it just one by one? Let's just list them. No, I'm just kidding.
But hey,
Kidding.
see the
Ray,
Aussie humor, people. That was a Brian Gill Aussie humor moment. That's sarcastic wit. That is certainly Australian. Okay. Oh my gosh. How long did that take? That was like half an hour into the interview. Didn't take long. So I was going to say is I would refer out. So
Mhm.
if someone comes to me and I don't understand something because I really don't feel comfortable, I don't have an empathy for that style, you should we be referring out? Or is it okay to say, all right, you know what? Yeah, I'll teach you.
Yeah, I think referring out is a strong thing to do. And again, I do think we have to have a solid base of people that we trust, that we
Mm-hmm.
can refer out to. Like there's certain things like within ornamentation, like within classical music, that I will always refer out. I'll say, man,
Mm,
we'll get your voice together, but if you want to get some stylistically correct ornaments, that is not my jam. I like it. I'll invent some things, and sometimes I stumble upon some great ornaments. But in general, I'd rather someone who has studied ornamentation of the different eras to jump in for me. You
mm-hmm.
know, I think we need to learn to outsource those things.
Yes,
So yeah, I agree with you 100% there.
yes. So
Mhm.
have you had classical students come to you and want training in CCM?
Yes,
And how
yes.
hard has it been for them?
Well, I think the first thing that I run into is they're doing it because they want to expand their potential gig opportunities. And
Yes.
I get that. And there's a whole group of people, we can name them as well, just kidding, that are making a bit of a living off of pretending like they can teach people a particular style.
Mm,
And I would emphasize a person learns a style from being immersed in a style, just like you learn a language by being immersed in the language. You will know the ins and outs of the language because you've been, if you're in France, entouré par les gens qui parlent français. You're surrounded by people who speak French, right? It's the same thing
that
too. You
was
need.
really good.
Hey, thank you very much. I lived there for a couple of years. I love it. But you have to be immersed in it. And so
Yes.
first thing I do is, like, if you're an opera singer and you don't like rock, then if you want to learn to sing rock, you need to have a very steady diet of listening to rock and roll. And same
Mm-hmm.
thing with gospel, same thing with any style. You've got to be
Mm.
immersed in it for a significant amount of hours and
Yes.
years, in order to be able to live in it. You learn the language that way. Otherwise, you come across as, for lack of a better word, a poser. Someone who's
Yeah.
just on an affect.
Yes. See, I say that my career started at 5 because
Yep,
that's when I started listening to the music. At
yep.
5 years old, I immersed myself in the music and I loved that music. And I continue to immerse myself in that music. Every Friday night, my husband and I, we call it Friday night dance party. We put
Right.
on Spotify and we choose a playlist. It could be 80s rock. It could be 70s R&B. It
Right.
could be hits of the latest pop hits.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I continue to listen to that music.
Mhm.
It, and I think that's the only way that we continue to be good teachers in a particular style
Yep.
or across styles is to continue not only have listened and
Mhm.
binged on that music in the past, but continue to evolve. And I think we always pick up something different that we
Yes.
didn't hear before.
Yes, inflections, and yeah, absolutely. And then staying current too, like listening to whatever style you're into and what is the latest output within that style, whether it's opera or rock or pop or gospel or whatever, and see how it's evolving, so that
Mm,
when folks come to you within that genre, but they're really influenced by newer artists, not the older artists, you can recommend older artists that they should be exposed to, but then also you should know this new stuff. And so yeah, I think it's so important. My oldest brother, Kevin, he's a guitar player and performs regularly, but then also teaches. And I always remember every time I go, and as a bass player I used to do it as well, he knows all the latest things because he's teaching it, so he's quite
mm.
current on the literature, and so you stay fluent in like the new, almost like the new evolution of the language.
Yes,
Yeah, it's what
yes.
it is now. Yes.
And there's something else that I'm seeing within the voice community, and I'm seeing this more in the US, and we're not naming names, Brian.
I'm sorry, it was a bad
Do
idea.
not name names. Blackie, this is my show, or you could get me fired.
Lips are sealed. I'm sorry.
Okay. But people miss, what's the word I'm looking for? People mix up, for want of a better use of words, what is CCM and what is music theatre.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the stuff that they think is CCM would not be popular or commercial
Mhm.
from a CCM music market standpoint.
Mhm.
There's a big difference between the sounds in music theatre to the sounds in, say, today's music markets.
Yeah.
And I've heard that too, where I've heard people put their students forward and say, okay, we're going to do a masterclass in this.
Mhm.
And then when I listen to it, I think no one would pay to listen to that from a commercial aspect.
Yeah, it's inauthentic. It's yeah, right.
Yeah, the students I seem to find the hardest to deal with and to get them to become more authentic in those styles, in those CCM styles, are music theatre students
Mhm.
more so than classical students.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is very common there, but I would say that there are more classical folks now, and again, it's largely due to availability of gigs, and they're
Mm,
often wanting to cross over into music theater at least, and then second would be some pop in interest in pop as well, but music theater is a huge draw just because the sheer number of opportunities
sure,
within. But yeah, I agree
sure.
though that it is more common for music theater folks to want to do pop.
Yes. So, in wrapping up about your teaching career,
Hmm.
what has been your proudest teacher moment?
Wow.
Is there one or a couple you want to share with us? You can have a
That's
brag here.
I mean, the most recent, just because I'm going to New York tomorrow to see her in Light in the Piazza, but is when my student Ruthie Ann Miles, longtime student now, won a Tony for her
Oh,
appearance in King and I,
wow.
Lady Young. Yeah, I mean that was it, and she
Oh,
very, very sweetly thanked me on live television. And I'll never forget that. I did not expect it. I was jumping up and down and screaming for her and so happy for all the hard work that she had put in and to see it realized like that. And then she thanked me as her mentor and teacher. And I was like, did she just, and I got
that
all
is
these contacts from everybody. I heard your name. And so that's probably one of my favorite moments. I mean, there's so many with all of my students, Grammy nominated and all these different things. But it's that one really stands out because she and I are super tight. We're like family, and we've been
yes.
together for a long time. And so yeah, that's a real standout, Ruthie Ann Miles. Yeah,
I would be so proud. I mean, that's incredible. A Tony Award.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that was a thrill.
So, what we're going to transition a little bit now and go into the science, the geeky side of Brian Gill. So, we're going to let go of the bass player who sings heavy metal. So, you've dedicated your life to demystifying the voice.
Yeah.
So, what do you believe is the greatest myth that we have about the voice?
Let's see. Greatest myth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the things that sits out there all the time, and I understand why people use it, but it's the concept of support.
Oh, yes.
So I'll just dive in there. People use
Yes.
it all the time, and I have yet to find anyone who could possibly define what it is, based on what we know in anatomy, physiology, and acoustics of the voice and voice function. I understand, and so I've taken a deep dive into the research behind it, and I've concluded there was this fantastic study that showed that there seems to be no difference between what people consider a supported sound and what is also considered good singing voice quality.
Mm-hmm.
So people assume that a person is quote unquote supporting a sound if there's good singing voice quality. But the issue is, what are they doing with their body? And the answer is, when you dig into it and you measure it, like the folks like Trazer and Echtenach and that group looked at it, people do different things with their body for different vocal functions. So
Right.
like pitch jumps or staccati or whatever it is, they're doing something different with their body. So the idea that support is one thing, I think, is one of the biggest myths in singing voice.
So where does that come from?
Well, that's a very good question, right? It sort of stems from even the same idea as sing with your diaphragm.
Oh,
That kind of concept, right? Which is just this big general thing that you could say what people mean by that is take a deep breath so the diaphragm goes down, right? Or have the diaphragm go down so you take in a deep breath. That'd be a better way of saying, actually.
yeah. Or a body mapping problem.
Yeah, or a body mapping problem, right? And so I'm sure that's what it stems from, but it gets so much more complicated then. And then that figures also into the concept of support. And when we have an invisible instrument, all of this stuff is inside. Until now, though, they're now X-rays of a person breathing and showing what's happening. And this is horrifying because I have a video that lasts for quite a long time of a person being X-rayed, and you see exactly what the diaphragm does or does not do based on the way their rib cage moves or their abdomen moves or doesn't move. So it's fascinating. But before all that happened, we had no sort of inside view. And so people just invent things then. So that's why you say, well, do something. When I sing, I feel my body activate. Absolutely, right? So then you could say, well, my body activates and it's supporting, quote unquote, my voice. I get that. But what is it doing? Is the activation staying expanded or allowing the abdomen to come in? Or is the rib cage staying expanded or coming in? And nowadays we have more ways to measure all of those things and to also see them. So I think we need to say goodbye to big general terms that were necessary before we knew these details and get into some more specifics about how the rib cage is operating, how the abdomen is operating, how the vocal folds themselves are operating between different styles, how the resonance is operating. We know a lot more specifics now, and I think we need to jump away from those big ballpark terms.
Two questions around that. Firstly, do you think people use the word support more for the sake of the student so that the student then knows they have to be doing something, whatever that thing is, that they can't just stand there and sing, that they actually have to physically be doing something to aid the voice? And when you talk about the confusion between good singing and supported singing, is that different per student, or do the same principles apply? Or are we all different? Like someone who's employing good singing and then they stand next to someone else who's also, doing some good singing. Can they be doing different things and it's still good singing?
So first question, I think you hit the nail on the head. I do think it is something that a teacher would say to be, if someone were just kind of delivering a song without any energy.
Yes.
They might dive in with a supported, do something.
Stand on your head. Do something.
Do anything, because right now it's coming across as pretty bland.
Yeah, it is like, you're almost flatlining here, people.
And I'm about to join you listening. So I think that's an aspect of it, right? Like, get in the game, please. But you could replace that with use more breath flow, or stay expanded, or whatever, change the shape of the resonance, right? You could change that and insert something more proactive, or direct. So so I think that's an aspect that would be important. And then the other thing is absolutely that people could be doing good singing voice quality and next side by side and be doing completely different things with body, and it'd be based on body shape, muscle tone, muscle coordination, the size of their vocal folds, thickness, how connected they are, how, all these different things. So they could be doing wildly different things and still both be rated as having a supported sound or a good singing voice quality.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, you've studied with Dr. Ingo Titze and Dr. Johann Sundberg in his summer course, The Science of the Singing Voice, and now you're a co-instructor in that program. And you teach all around the world, and you've been doing that for the last 10 years. Who's had the greatest impact in the way that you've formulated your ideas around voice science, acoustics, all that kind of thing?
Yes. Well, I think it started with Barbara Doscher. She was so well into how science meets practice. So she was doing her best to marry those two things when I was together with her. And so that was my springboard into the science side of it, looking for explanations. And she was a great example because she did not pretend to know what she didn't know. She was incredibly curious, and she knew more. To this day, she's the best practitioner I've ever witnessed. It was this magical thing, especially, towards the end. She passed away right at the end of my master's degree, unfortunately. And I was going to go on and study my doctorate with her, already signed up and ready to go, but she passed away that summer. But she was fully present with the person and with thinking about what do we know, and from voice science, and how can we integrate that into this person's singing in order to inform the communication. It was always about that. If you were nuts and bolts with her and then you stayed there, she'd be like, don't ever sing that song again unless you're going to commit to the text. Like she would turn all of a sudden and say, all this stuff we've been doing, it's to serve communication, not just, so I love that about her. So, but that's what got me started, the curiosity and the open-mindedness about it, and not feeling like you had to conclude something so definitively that there's no room for any other input. I love that about her. And then, the next one was Ingo Titze, and his knowledge of voice science is unbelievable. And he was such a great teacher. And it was in 2000 that I first met him and took his vocology course. And that really solidified that I needed to spend my life joining these things, joining the worlds of performance with what we know in voice science. So that really got me started. And then not too long after that, I met Johann Sundberg. And in addition to him being one of the greatest minds in the world in voice science, he is also one of the most generous human beings. He's like indefatigable. He just will spend time with curious souls. And to quote him, he likes being around people who are looking for the truth and tends to avoid those who have found it. I just think it's great. And so he and I then have now, over our, now it's like 14 years, have become very close friends to the point we're family. And so that has allowed me to be able to take deep dive after deep dive after deep dive with him and talk through these things and bat it back and forth. Here's what I do in training. He respects me as a trainer, and he says, well, we can't really say A, B, and C because that doesn't make sense with, these things that we've learned, but what is it? And he actually, this time I gave a master class for this Swedish course last week. And he came up to me and he said, certain things that I say haven't really been proven yet. And he said, but the problem is they work so darn well. So I think I would say he's been a long-standing friend and a co-conspirator. No, what's the word?
Yes, I think so. I've seen the pair of you together.
He also has a great sense of humor.
I know. You know what? when we were in Philly just not so long ago, all of us,
Yeah,
and we had that night out
that was
with you.
great.
Can I tell you, I was looking around the table. There was you, there was Johan, there was some other women there. I'm not sure who they were, and Philippa,
Philippa,
Sten,
yes,
yes,
Steen. Yep.
Steen, and Jeannie Lavetri, and
Yes.
and and we were sitting around having dinner and a laugh and doing it. We did a reel for my social, which by the way went viral.
Yeah.
Remember that? We had to do like a Mexican wave with our glasses. And Johan, of course, he had to muck it up and be the odd one out. But but I just was in that moment where I thought, I can't believe I'm sitting here with these people and what big hearts these people have, what amazing human beings and amazing minds that I'm surrounded by. It was one of the most humbling and yet most gratifying moments in my life, sitting
Oh,
there having dinner with you guys.
I felt the same way. That's the way I feel, and it's with generous people, right? It's hard to believe that they
Mhm.
can be so talented, right? I mean, it was such a wonderful group to be with. So yeah, I loved being there with you and that whole group. That was awesome.
It was fun. Now I have to back maybe an hour prior to that dinner. There was a very intense meeting going on at the Voice Foundation Symposium in one of the meeting rooms. And I have a photo of the faces and the expressions on the faces. So it was very intense. And there was Johan, Ingo, Steen, yourself. I don't know who else was there. I don't know if
Ron
Philippe.
Scher, yep, Philippe Alain, yep.
Mhm.
Claudia Solomon, I believe, was there. Yes.
Okay. Now, it was really intense. I want to know, what were you guys talking about?
we we were trying to figure out where to go to dinner.
No, you were not. Ingo was there. He didn't come to dinner.
I'm, I'm kidding.
Well, you ended up at my hotel for dinner.
That's right. Thanks to your great suggestion. That was an awesome suggestion. No, we had presented, Johan Felipe and I had presented some information
Yes.
that basically contradicts a bit of what Ingo Tietze has been talking about with nonlinear source filter interaction. And we're on a quest to see it, right? Not to prove that it's not there, but to see it. How do you see it? And so using inverse filtering, we were looking at it and we saw one example out of 7 of the subjects that we studied where you could say that it looks like it's there. So that's not a lot. And so the question's out there. Is it something that you take advantage of, or is it something you avoid? And of course, there's positive nonlinear source field. In theory, there's positive and negative interaction. So after we presented that, I saw Ingo talking very seriously to Ron, and I thought, I bet this is about that topic. So I went back and I listened, and it was. So I sat down, being the I like
Nosy.
nosy, and I like to commune. I like to get to the bottom of things, and I respect Ingo so much, and Ron. It was, So I thought, let me go join in. And Ingo saw me and he said, Brian, I need to talk to you about the research you guys did. I was like, great, that's why I came over. So he started talking to me about it, some of the issues that he had with it, and going into detail. So we began the conversation, and then I thought, well, it's only fair to have Johan Sundberg come join.
Of
And so
course.
I called him over, and then he sat down and we had this very matter-of-fact discussion about ways of looking at this phenomenon, and then ways to move forward. And so Ingo had some suggestions, and Johan, I mean, I was kind of sitting listening, and then also pushing the issue a bit more, like the way that nonlinear source filter interaction is looked at using the MADA synthesizer and using the transfer function of the vocal tract, and thinking about it linearly you would think if you looked at it that way, you would see some anomalies. You would see something that would indicate, hey, this particular way will not allow, it will not work in defining voice because here are these outliers. And what we found is using the theories that Johann uses, it seems to define voice pretty well. So anyway, so we were arguing, not arguing, but discussing intensely.
It was.
Forth. Yeah, it was intense. It was an intense but also beautiful conversation. And I talked to Ingo a couple of days later before he was leaving, and he said, which was it was so heartening to hear this. He said, I really like your group, you, Ingo, and Filipa. And I said, well, we're dependent on you to push us. And he said, oh, I'll push.
Yes.
This is great. And, in the spirit of pushing things forward. So I'm going to be in touch with him also to say, how else do we need to look at this and find some real solid ways forward, so we can, can continue to demystify voice.
Can I tell you, I have no idea what you're talking about when you're talking about this non-linear, whatever it is.
Source filter interaction. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are you talking about?
It's incredibly complicated. It's in big ballpark terms. It would be that one way you could look at it is there's an effect that the vocal tract has a feedback mechanism that feeds back to the vocal folds and will either help or hinder their vibration.
Oh.
So you look at it as a feedback. So from a practitioner, I get that and I sense that, and I think that that's very reasonable. When I look at the measurements that Johann has done, it's almost as if you're trying to especially avoid the negative impact from the vocal tract. That I'm sure of too. You're trying to avoid that, but then the positive impact, like the idea that Ingo says you could put a sine wave, a simple sine wave, so just a compression rarefaction. You could put a sine wave through the vocal tract, and it could then become a more full spectrum without anything from here. That it's what's going on inside the vocal tract that could produce a more full spectrum with more harmonics in it.
Right? So knowing about that, is that going to benefit the teacher or the singer?
Both. I think both, because if you knew what to look for in terms of shaping, more specific shaping of the vocal tract, you could get to the bottom of something quicker. Like you could say, close your mouth here. If you're wanting this sound, you want to be more narrow. If you want this sound, you want to be more open. And if we knew more about that feedback, then you can prescribe more specifically what to do in any given situation.
Okay.
Yeah, so a huge benefit for the teacher to get to the problem faster and for the student to get a faster result.
Wow. Okay, so in moving forward, I do have so many questions for you around what is evidence-based, what is science-based around acoustics. So we will continue to talk about more of this in a part 2 of this interview. You okay with that, Brian?
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to wrap this part of it up, but this is on hold because we have only started to scratch the scratch. I truly am wanting to take a deep dive into all this stuff.
Great. I can't wait. I'm so thrilled to be chatting with you, and I can't wait to chat again.
Likewise. Okay, we're going to continue on. So stay tuned, folks.